How does a man worth $8 billion lose everything in a single night? For Sterling Blackwood, the answer began with a microphone and a fatal mistake. At a gala celebrating his genius, he decided to publicly discard his pregnant wife for his young mistress, announcing the affair to the world. He saw it as a power move, the start of a new life. He never anticipated his wife would have a plan of her own, one that involved divorce papers, a camera crew, and a devastating clause in their prenup that would cost him not just his money, but his entire kingdom. The grand ballroom of the Astor Hotel was a universe unto itself, a swirling galaxy of champagne flutes, diamond earrings, and calculated smiles. Every star in New York's high society firmament was present orbiting one central sun, Sterling Blackwood. Tonight was his coronation. The Apex Gala, an annual charity event, had chosen to honor him with its Visionary of the Year award. It was more than an award. It was a confirmation of his status as a modern-day king, the founder and CEO of Aether Innovations, a tech behemoth that had reshaped the digital landscape. Sterling stood near the marble-clad stage, a statuesque figure in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. His dark hair was perfectly coiffed, his jawline sharp, and his eyes a cool shade of gray, swept across the room with the easy confidence of a man who owned it. He wasn't just in the room. The room belonged to him. Every handshake was an act of fealty, every laugh a tribute. He was the master of this universe, and he savored the feeling like a vintage Bordeaux. On his arm was Scarlett Dubois. She was in a word breathtaking. A cascade of auburn hair fell over the bare skin of her back, showcased by a backless emerald gown that clung to her like a second skin. She was 24, a full 15 years younger than Sterling, an actress with a handful of minor roles and a major talent for capturing the spotlight. She moved with a liquid grace, her laughter a musical note in the symphony of chatter. To the uninitiated, she was simply his stunning companion for the evening. But to the inner circle, the whispers had been circulating for months. She was the reason Sterling's wife Amelia was so conspicuously absent. Robert Finch Sterling's harried but loyal head of communications hovered nearby, his face a mask of professional calm that barely concealed his churning anxiety. "The press is loving this, Sterling," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. "Forbes, the Chronicle, Bloomberg. They're all here. The coverage for the Aether Gen 2 launch next quarter will be phenomenal." "As it should be, Robert," Sterling replied, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention. He squeezed Scarlett's hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Success should be celebrated, not hidden away." Scarlett looked up at him, her eyes wide, with what appeared to be pure adoration. "You deserve all of this, darling. Everything you've built. It's awe-inspiring." Her words were honey, and Sterling drank them in. He felt a surge of validation. This was what he wanted. Not the quiet, dignified partnership he had with Amelia, a relationship forged in cramped apartments and over instant noodles while he was building his empire. Amelia was a partner from the chapter of his struggle. Scarlett, he believed, was the prize for his victory. Amelia understood balance sheets. Scarlett understood the power of a perfectly timed photograph. In his mind, the choice was clear. Amelia. The thought of her was a minor discordant note in his triumphant symphony. He knew she wouldn't be here. Her pregnancy, now in its 7th month, had been difficult. The official story was that she was resting on doctor's orders. It was a convenient, respectable lie that covered the chasm that had opened between them. The arguments, the cold silences, the nights he spent at his penthouse office which was in reality Scarlett's lavishly appointed apartment overlooking Central Park. He had convinced himself that the separation was for the best, a slow, inevitable uncoupling. He told himself he was being gentle, letting the marriage die a natural death before he began his new life. He was, of course, lying to himself. He was a coward, hiding behind excuses and waiting for the perfect moment to drop the guillotine. He believed this night was that moment. The gala was more than just an awards ceremony. It was a performance, and Sterling was its lead actor and director. He moved through the crowd, Scarlett a glittering accessory on his arm, accepting congratulations, making pronouncements on the future of technology and charming investors. He spoke of Aether's new philanthropic arm, a project designed to bring tech education to underprivileged communities. It was a brilliant PR move, one that Amelia had ironically conceptualized months ago before their world had fractured. He delivered the lines she had helped him write, feeling no shame, only a sense of entitlement. He had made it a reality, so in his mind, it was his creation. He's a force of nature. One guest, a banking tycoon named Arthur Cole, remarked to his companion. Built Aether from nothing, and the woman on his arm, a significant upgrade. The words, though whispered, seemed to hang in the air, a reflection of the brutal calculus of their world. As the dinner service concluded and the clinking of cutlery faded, a hush fell over the ballroom. The event's host, a well-known television personality, took the stage. He delivered a glowing tribute to Sterling, listing his achievements like verses in a hymn. The speech was filled with words like innovator, disruptor, and titan. Sterling listened, his expression a careful blend of humility and pride. He felt Scarlett squeeze his hand again, a silent electric charge of encouragement. Ladies and gentlemen, the host concluded, his voice booming. It is my profound honor to present the Visionary of the Year award to the man who is not just predicting the future, but building it, Mr. Sterling Blackwood. A thunderous applause erupted, a wave of sound that washed over Sterling, cleansing him of any lingering guilt. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and gave Scarlett a quick, possessive kiss on the cheek. Her perfume, a heady mix of jasmine and something more exotic, filled his senses. This was real. This was his life now. He ascended the few steps to the stage, the spotlights finding him, blinding him to the individual faces in the crowd, transforming them into a single adoring entity. He shook the host's hand, accepted the heavy ornate crystal award, and turned to face the microphone. The applause slowly died down, leaving a silence pregnant with expectation. Thank you. He began, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity. Thank you all. It's an incredible honor to receive this award in a room filled with so many brilliant minds, so many people I admire. He launched into his prepared remarks, a speech about innovation, responsibility, and the relentless pursuit of progress. He was polished, charismatic, and utterly captivating. He had the audience in the palm of his hand. Robert Finch, standing at the side of the room, allowed himself a small, relieved smile. It was going perfectly. As he neared the end of his speech, Sterling paused, taking a sip of water and letting the silence hang for a dramatic beat. But as much as Aether Innovations is about building the future of technology, he continued, his tone shifting to something more personal, more intimate, I've also come to realize the importance of building a future for oneself, a future based on truth, on passion, and on authentic happiness. Robert's smile froze on his face. This wasn't in the script. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. What is he doing? He hissed to himself. Sterling's gaze found Scarlett in the crowd. He smiled a genuine, unguarded smile that sent a fresh wave of murmurs through the ballroom. For a long time, I was living a life that was expected of me, not the one I truly wanted. But life, if you're lucky, gives you a chance for a new beginning, a chance to be honest. He set the award down on the lectern with a soft thud. And my new beginning is with a woman who has shown me what true partnership, what true love really means. He gestured towards Scarlett. I want to share my happiness with all of you tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in celebrating the incredible woman by my side. He paused, letting the suspense build to a crescendo, his eyes gleaming in the spotlight. My partner, my love, and my future wife, Scarlett Dubois. The announcement hit the room like a sonic boom. The silence that followed Sterling's declaration was deeper and more profound than any that had preceded it. It was a vacuum sucking the air and warmth out of the grand ballroom. For a full 3 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic beating of 200 hearts. The collective shock was a physical presence, a palpable entity that settled over the silks and jewels. Then the universe rushed back in. A single champagne flute dropped by a nerveless hand shattered on the polished floor, the sound like a gunshot. It broke the spell. A low, unified gasp swept through the crowd, followed by an explosion of whispers that grew into a roar. Phones previously hidden under napkins or tucked into evening bags emerged as if summoned by a single command. Their screens lit up the dim room, a constellation of tiny, hungry eyes, all pointed at the stage. Sterling Blackwood stood at the lectern, bathed in the white glare of the spotlight, a triumphant, almost messianic expression on his face. He had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his own life and seemed to believe the fallout was beautiful like fireworks. He saw not the scandal, but the liberation. He had finally spoken his truth, and the world would just have to adjust. Down at her table, Scarlett Dubois was the picture of overwhelmed, tearful joy. She brought a delicate hand to her lips, her eyes glistening. It was a masterful performance of surprised ecstasy. She rose slowly, gracefully, as Sterling beckoned her to the stage. She seemed to float through the parted sea of guests, her emerald dress shimmering. Every eye was on her, a mixture of envy, pity, and naked curiosity in their gazes. She was the woman who had won the billionaire. But she was also the home wrecker, the other woman now publicly crowned. The title came with both a kingdom and a scarlet letter. As she reached the stage, Sterling took her hand, his grip firm and possessive. He raised their joined hands in the air as if they had just won a championship. This was his victory lap. He leaned into the microphone, his voice booming over the rising tide of gossip. She has made me the happiest man alive. The flashbulbs from the press section, which had been popping intermittently, now erupted into a relentless, blinding strobe. It was a feeding frenzy. The photographers jostled for position, their lenses like the muzzles of weapons aimed at the couple on stage. Sterling over here. Scarlett, give us a smile. The questions came next, shouted from the floor. Mr. Blackwood, are you confirming your separation? What about your wife, Amelia? Is she aware of this announcement? Sterling ignored them all. He leaned over and whispered something in Scarlett's ear, and she laughed a sound that was both musical and, under the circumstances, jarringly inappropriate. He then kissed her a deep, passionate kiss meant for the cameras, for the world. It was a branding iron marking her as his. The action confirmed the narrative. The old was gone. The new had arrived. Robert Finch, meanwhile, was having a full-blown panic attack at the side of the room. His face had gone from pale to ashen. His phone was buzzing incessantly in his pocket, a frantic vibration against his leg. It would be the board, the investors, the legal team. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Idiot," he muttered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "You absolute, arrogant idiot." This wasn't a PR announcement. It was a self-immolation. He had spent years carefully curating Sterling's public image, the family man, the stable genius, the respectable philanthropist. In 30 seconds, Sterling had torched it all for a 24-year-old actress. Robert knew this wasn't just a personal scandal. It was a corporate crisis. Aether Innovations was Sterling Blackwood. His reputation was inextricably linked to the company's stock price. The market opened at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow. Robert felt a wave of nausea. The guests were no longer even pretending to be polite. The room had devolved into a chaotic hub of information trading. Whispers became open conversation. "I knew it. I saw them at Nobu last month. But Amelia is pregnant. Can you imagine? This is beyond scandalous. It's cruel. Her father is on the board of 3 major banks. This will not go over well." Penelope Hayes, a veteran journalist from the New York Chronicle, known for her incisive reporting, was not whispering. She was observing her mind, a steel trap cataloguing every detail. The defiant look in Sterling's eyes, the tremor in Scarlett's hand, despite her smile, the sheer theatrical audacity of the moment. She was already composing the lead paragraph of her story in her head. This wasn't just celebrity gossip. This was a story about power hubris and the spectacular collision of the personal and the professional at the highest echelon of society. Sterling, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the nuances of the chaos he had unleashed, finally released Scarlett from their kiss. He looked out at the sea of flashing lights and buzzing phones, a king surveying his tumultuous kingdom. He believed he was in complete control. He was so high on his own perceived power, on the adrenaline of his grand gesture, that he failed to notice the subtle shift in the room's energy. He didn't see that the main doors at the far end of the grand ballroom had swung silently open. He was about to say more, to perhaps double down on his declaration, when a new silence began to creep into the room. It started at the back and rolled forward like a wave, extinguishing the chatter as it went. The frantic energy of the crowd didn't disappear. It changed, coalescing and refocusing on a new subject. Heads began to turn one by one away from the stage. The cacophony of the press photographers faltered. A few lenses, then a dozen, swiveled from Sterling and Scarlett towards the entrance. A confused frown flickered across Sterling's face. He had commanded the room's attention, and now it was being stolen from him. He squinted against the spotlights, trying to see what had so captivated his audience. Scarlett, sensing the shift, lost her smile. Her perfectly poised facade cracked, revealing a flicker of genuine alarm. What Sterling saw made the blood drain from his face. His confident posture stiffened his shoulders, squaring as if bracing for a physical impact. The triumphant gleam in his eyes was replaced by a cold, leaden dread. His universe, which seconds ago had seemed so perfectly aligned around him, had just been invaded by a foreign, celestial body, one with its own immense and undeniable gravity. Standing in the grand doorway, framed by the ornate gold leaf, was the ghost he thought he had left at home. It was his wife, Amelia. She was not supposed to be there. In Sterling's carefully constructed narrative for the evening, Amelia was a footnote, a character from a previous chapter tucked away at home, nursing her pregnancy and her quiet dignity. He had imagined her finding out tomorrow, perhaps through a sympathetic phone call from a friend, or by seeing the headlines online. It would be contained, private, manageable. He had not in his wildest, most arrogant imaginings planned for this. Amelia Vance stood at the threshold of the ballroom, a portrait of lethal serenity. She was not crying. Her face was not contorted in grief or rage. Instead, her expression was one of glacial composure. It was a look of profound, unnerving calm that was far more terrifying than any hysterical outburst could have ever been. Her presence instantly changed the moral calculus of the room. The abstract concept of the wife was now a living, breathing, and very pregnant reality. She was dressed in a simple, elegant navy blue gown of heavy silk that draped beautifully over her 7-month baby bump. The dress was modest yet regal, its dark color absorbing the light and drawing all focus to her. She wore no ostentatious jewelry, only the simple diamond earrings Sterling had given her on their first anniversary, and the wedding band on her finger, which seemed to catch the light with an accusatory gleam. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe classic chignon, accentuating the sharp, intelligent lines of her face. She looked not like a victim, but like a queen about to pass sentence. She was not alone. Flanking her were 2 other figures. On her right was Genevieve Croft, her lawyer. Croft was a legend in New York's divorce courts, a woman known for her razor-sharp intellect and her take-no-prisoners approach. She was tall, dressed in a severe black pantsuit that was a stark statement of business in this sea of couture. On Amelia's other side was a man in a simple suit holding a professional-grade video camera, its red recording light glowing like a malevolent eye. He was not with the press corps. His presence felt official, deliberate. The room was now utterly silent. The journey from the ballroom doors to the foot of the stage was perhaps 50 yards, but it felt like a mile. Amelia began to walk. Her steps were not hesitant. They were measured, deliberate, and imbued with an unshakable purpose. The crowd parted for her as if by royal decree. The whispers died in people's throats. The mobile phones that had been aimed at the stage now turned to track her slow, inexorable progress. She was a battleship, cutting through still water, leaving a wake of stunned silence. On stage, Sterling was paralyzed. The blood pounded in his ears. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, was a blank slate of white-hot panic. This was a scenario so far outside his realm of planning that he had no protocol for it. He looked at Scarlett, whose face had gone pale beneath her perfect makeup. The manufactured joy had vanished, replaced by the raw, undisguised terror of a usurper confronting the rightful queen. Her hand, still in Sterling's, was now slick with sweat. She took a half-step back, instinctively trying to hide behind him. Penelope Hayes, the journalist, felt a thrill of pure, predatory adrenaline. She gestured subtly to her photographer. "Get her face," she mouthed. "Every expression." This was no longer just a story about an affair. This was a public execution. Amelia's eyes were fixed on one person, and one person only, her husband. She didn't look at the shocked faces of their friends and colleagues. She didn't acknowledge the flashing cameras or the pointing phones. Her gaze was a laser beam, and it pinned Sterling to the back of the stage. He could feel its physical weight. In her eyes, he saw none of the warmth he had once known, none of the love they had shared. He saw only a vast, cold emptiness, the dead calm at the center of a hurricane. As she drew closer, the details of her appearance became sharper. He noticed the dark circles under her eyes, a testament to sleepless nights, but they did not make her look weak. They made her look formidable, like a warrior who had been through a great battle and had emerged harder, stronger. Her pregnancy was not a vulnerability. It was her armor. It was a visible symbol of his betrayal, a living, growing testament to the family he was trying to discard. She reached the foot of the stage and stopped. She did not need to raise her voice. She did not need to scream. The charged silence of the room amplified her very presence. She simply stood there looking up at her husband and his mistress, and waited. The power dynamic in the room had been completely inverted. Minutes ago, Sterling had been the king on his throne. Now he was a prisoner in the dock, and his judge had just arrived. Robert Finch finally snapped out of his paralysis. He began to push his way through the crowd, his mind racing. He had to get Sterling off that stage. He had to cut the microphones. He had to do something. But he was too far away, trapped by the wall of silent, gaping onlookers. Genevieve Croft stepped forward slightly, her hand resting on a sleek leather briefcase. The cameraman with them adjusted his focus, ensuring both Amelia and the couple on stage were perfectly framed. Everything about their arrival screamed preparation strategy and impeccable timing. This was not a spontaneous act of a heartbroken wife. This was a calculated, strategic strike, planned with military precision. Sterling finally found his voice, though it was a hoarse, unfamiliar croak. "Amelia, what are you doing here? You should be at home." The words were feeble, absurd in their inadequacy. He was a general whose fortress had been breached, asking the invading army for its visitor's pass. Amelia's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth, no humor. It was a sharp, dangerous thing. She looked past Sterling, her eyes landing on Scarlett for the first time. She appraised her from head to toe, her gaze lingering for a moment on the glittering emerald dress. Then on the proprietary way, Sterling was still clutching her hand. She then returned her gaze to her husband. She took one more step forward, placing a hand protectively on her stomach. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was not loud, but it was clear and cold, and it cut through the silence like a shard of ice. "I was at home," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "But I heard there was a celebration, and I believe you have something that belongs to me." Sterling flinched as if struck. Amelia's voice, though calm, held the chilling promise of retribution. The room held its breath, a collective human statue garden. On the stage, Scarlett's practiced composure had completely crumbled. She looked from Amelia's unyielding face to Sterling's panicked one, her dream evening curdling into a nightmare. She was no longer a celebrated future bride. She was a co-conspirator caught in the act. "Amelia, this is not the time or the place," Sterling managed, attempting to regain some semblance of authority. He tried to inject a tone of stern reason into his voice, the one he used to shut down contentious board meetings. "We can discuss this privately." Amelia let out a soft, mirthless laugh. "Privately," she repeated the word, dripping with scorn. "You just announced your infidelity and your bigamous intentions to a room of 500 people and the entire world's media, Sterling. I think you forfeited the right to privacy the moment you stepped up to that microphone." Her gaze swept across the audience, and for the first time she acknowledged them. She wasn't asking for their pity. She was making them witnesses. "My husband, the visionary of the year," she said, her voice laced with irony, "seems to have had a vision of a future that conveniently omits a few key details. His wife, for one, and his unborn child." A wave of sympathetic and scandalized murmurs rippled through the crowd. The narrative was now firmly in her control. She had recast the scene, not as a domestic dispute, but as a public betrayal of the highest order. Genevieve Croft, Amelia's lawyer, chose this moment to act. With the quiet efficiency of a surgeon, she opened her leather briefcase. She produced a thick sheaf of documents bound in a pale blue legal cover. She ascended the 2 short steps to the stage, her heels clicking with sharp authority. She walked directly past the frozen figure of Scarlett and stood before Sterling. She did not say a word. She simply held out the documents. Sterling stared at the papers as if they were a venomous snake. He knew what they were. He just couldn't comprehend how they were here now, in this moment of his supposed triumph. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. It was Amelia who answered from the floor, her voice ringing with clarity. "That Sterling is our future, the one you didn't bother to plan. Those are our divorce papers." The flashbulbs erupted in a blinding, percussive frenzy. The sound was like a volley of gunfire. The reporters surged forward, shouting questions that blended into an incoherent wall of sound. "Amelia, are you filing for divorce tonight? What are your terms? Mr. Blackwood, any comment?" Sterling didn't take the papers. Genevieve Croft, undeterred, placed them firmly on the lectern, right on top of his award acceptance speech. The symbolism was brutal. His personal downfall was literally eclipsing his professional peak. "You can't do this," Sterling stammered, his eyes darting between Amelia and the legal documents. His mind was scrambling, trying to find a move, a strategy, but he was hopelessly outmaneuvered. "Oh, I can," Amelia said, her voice hardening. "And I have. But there's a more pressing issue, isn't there?" She looked directly at Scarlett, who physically recoiled. "You seem to be under a slight misapprehension, Ms. Dubois. Sterling made you a promise he is legally unable to keep." She turned her focus back to her husband, her eyes blazing with cold fire. "You see, you can't have a future wife, Sterling, when you are still very, very much married to your current one." The finality in her tone was absolute. Checkmate. Scarlett, finally breaking her silence, turned to Sterling, her voice a high-pitched, panicked whisper. "Sterling, what is she talking about? You told me it was over. You said you had already filed." Sterling couldn't answer. He was trapped, exposed as a liar and a fool on the grandest stage he had ever occupied. The image of power and control he had so carefully cultivated had been shattered into a million pieces. Amelia watched their frantic, whispered exchange with detached contempt. She had played her hand. It was time for her exit. She gave a slight nod to her lawyer. Genevieve Croft descended the steps and rejoined her side. The cameraman, who had captured the entire exchange in unflinching high definition, lowered his camera. His job was done. With one last, lingering look at the wreckage of her husband on the stage, Amelia turned her back on him. She did not rush. She walked away with the same deliberate, regal pace with which she had arrived. She had come, she had conquered, and now she was leaving. The crowd parted for her once again, their faces a mixture of awe, pity, and admiration. She had turned her deepest humiliation into her greatest moment of strength. As she reached the doors, Penelope Hayes of the Chronicle managed to step into her path. "Amelia, a moment of your time." "Any statement for the press?" Amelia paused. She looked at the seasoned reporter, offering a brief, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. She then leaned in slightly, her voice low but clear, meant only for Penelope. "The documents," she said, "speak for themselves." And with that, she swept out of the ballroom, leaving behind a scene of utter devastation. On the stage, Sterling Blackwood, the visionary of the year, stood alone amidst the flashing lights, his future wife weeping beside him, and his divorce papers sitting on the lectern like an epitaph for the life he had just destroyed. The king had been publicly, spectacularly, and irrevocably dethroned. The Apex Gala did not end. It disintegrated. Within minutes of Amelia's departure, the ballroom was in chaos. Sterling was hastily bundled off the stage, by a panicked Robert Finch and a pair of hotel security guards, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He was bundled through a service corridor and into a waiting car, shielded from the baying pack of reporters who had swarmed the hotel entrance. Scarlett was left behind. Abandoned on the stage, she was quickly engulfed by a tide of journalists shouting questions. Her tear-streaked face, a portrait of bewildered misery, would be on the cover of every tabloid the next morning. The story exploded across the internet. The video, presumably leaked from Amelia's private cameraman, went viral within the hour. Blackwood downfall was trending worldwide. News outlets dissected the footage frame by frame, Sterling's arrogant announcement, Amelia's chilling entrance, the public serving of the divorce papers. It was a morality play for the digital age, and the world was captivated. The immediate professional fallout for Sterling was catastrophic. By the time the New York Stock Exchange opened the next morning, Aether Innovations was already in free fall. Pre-market trading showed the stock down by 15%. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting. The scandal wasn't just about infidelity, it was about judgment. How could a CEO, who demonstrated such reckless, arrogant, and poor decision-making in his personal life, be trusted to steer a multi-billion-dollar corporation? The visionary of the year was now seen as a liability, his name a toxic asset. The initial news reports focused on the salacious details of the divorce. Pundits speculated on the settlement. Given Sterling's estimated net worth of $8 billion and the public nature of his humiliation of Amelia, they predicted she would walk away with one of the largest divorce settlements in history. Sterling, holed up in his penthouse with a team of frantic lawyers, was prepared for this. He was ready to write a check, a massive one, to make this go away. He would lose a fortune, but he would keep his company, his kingdom. He believed he could weather the storm. He was wrong. He had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the war Amelia was waging. 3 days after the gala, Penelope Hayes of the New York Chronicle secured the exclusive interview she had been chasing. Not with Amelia, who remained completely silent, but with her lawyer, Genevieve Croft. They met in Croft's sterile, intimidatingly minimalist office, overlooking the city. Penelope got straight to the point. "The world is talking about the money, Genevieve. Is Amelia going for half of his fortune?" Genevieve smiled, a thin, knowing smile. "Mr. Blackwood's fortune is certainly a component," she said, her voice precise and cool. "But Amelia has never been primarily motivated by money. She is motivated by principle and by justice." "What does justice look like in this case?" Penelope pressed, sensing there was more to the story. This was the moment Genevieve had been waiting for. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with Penelope's. "Everyone is focused on the divorce papers. They're looking at the wrong document. The key isn't the dissolution of the marriage. It's the enforcement of the prenuptial agreement they signed 9 years ago." Penelope frowned. A prenup usually protects the wealthier party. It would limit Sterling's liability, not increase it. "Usually," Genevieve agreed. But Amelia was a successful investment banker before she left her career to support Sterling and help build Aether's public profile. She was no fool. Her father insisted on a prenup not to protect Sterling's future wealth, but to protect Amelia from this very kind of implosion. At her insistence, a unique set of clauses was included. She slid a single redacted sheet of paper across the polished desk. Penelope picked it up. "There is, of course, a standard infidelity clause," Genevieve explained. "It's punitive, granting Amelia a significant lump sum payment far exceeding a standard settlement. But that's just the appetizer. The main course is Clause 12B. Penelope's eyes scanned the document, Clause 12B. It was titled the Moral Turpitude and Reputational Damage Clause. Sterling was the face of the company, Genevieve continued. His image and the company's value were intrinsically linked. This clause states that if one party, through an act of public moral turpitude, causes significant and demonstrable financial or reputational harm to Aether Innovations, the other party is entitled to immediate and severe compensation. What kind of compensation? Penelope asked, her heart beginning to beat faster. This was big. It's not financial, Genevieve said, delivering the killer line. The penalty isn't gauche. The penalty is a transfer of assets. Specifically, it triggers the transfer of 51% of Sterling Blackwood's personal voting shares in Aether Innovations to Amelia Vance. Penelope Hayes stared at the lawyer, her mind reeling to process the information. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about power. It was about control. Amelia wasn't trying to take Sterling's fortune. She was trying to take his company. His public announcement at the gala, followed by the stock plummeting 22% in 2 days. That's your trigger. Penelope stated, the pieces clicking into place. It's the very definition of the clause, Genevieve confirmed. He publicly humiliated his pregnant wife, announced an intention to commit bigamy, and in doing so single-handedly wiped over $4 billion off the company's market capitalization. It's the cleanest trigger event I've ever seen in my career. The article was published the next morning under a banner headline, "The Billion-Dollar Betrayal, Blackwood's prenup could cost him his empire." The story sent a new shockwave through Wall Street and Silicon Valley. Sterling Blackwood hadn't just made a personal mistake. He had committed corporate suicide. He had been so blinded by his own arrogance, so eager to discard the woman who had helped build him, that he had forgotten the fine print of the contract he signed years ago. The twist was brilliant in its brutality. Amelia wasn't the scorned wife seeking revenge through alimony. She was the shrewd strategist, the wronged queen who had been given the contractual keys to the kingdom by the king himself. He had handed her the weapon, and his own hubris had loaded the bullet. Now she was simply pulling the trigger. The battle for Sterling's billions was over. The war for Aether Innovations had just begun. The revelation of Clause 12B turned the public scandal into a legendary corporate showdown. Sterling Blackwood, who had been licking his wounds and planning a financial settlement, was now fighting for his professional life. He assembled a ferocious legal team, decrying the prenup as unconscionable and predatory. His lawyers painted Amelia as a vindictive gold digger, a Machiavellian schemer who had been waiting for years to pounce. But the narrative wouldn't stick. Public sympathy was overwhelmingly with the pregnant wife he had so cruelly cast aside. The contract was ironclad, signed by Sterling when he was desperate for Amelia's family connections to secure his first round of funding. He had been so focused on protecting his then meager cash that he had been careless with the currency he now valued most control. Aether Innovations was paralyzed. The board was fractured, with some loyalists supporting Sterling and others terrified of the ongoing stock hemorrhage and the potential for shareholder lawsuits calling for his immediate resignation. The company that had been the darling of the tech world was now a punchline, its visionary leader embroiled in the messiest divorce of the decade. Weeks turned into a brutal, grinding month of legal skirmishes and media attacks. Sterling grew haggard, the confident titan replaced by a cornered, paranoid man. He became obsessed with the idea that this was all a conspiracy, that someone had manipulated events to lead him to this downfall. His primary target of suspicion was Scarlett Dubois. After being abandoned at the gala, Scarlett had vanished. Her agent released a statement saying she was devastated and had been misled by Sterling. She played the part of the naive, heartbroken young woman caught in the crossfire. But Sterling, stewing in his penthouse office, started pulling at the threads of their relationship. He remembered how she had subtly encouraged him to be more public, how she had planted the seed of making a grand gesture at the Apex Gala. "You need to own your truth, Sterling," she had cooed. "Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed of our love." At the time, he had seen it as loving encouragement. Now he saw it as a deliberate push towards the cliff's edge. He hired a private investigator, a former Mossad agent named Kalen, to dig into Scarlett's life. He wanted dirt, anything he could use to discredit her, and by extension the narrative that had ruined him. He expected to find a history of dating wealthy men, perhaps some minor scandals. What Kalen uncovered was far more complex and far more devastating. The report landed on Sterling's desk a week later. It was a thick file filled with financial records, travel logs, and encrypted communication transcripts. The truth it revealed was a second, perfectly executed twist in the plot against him. Scarlett Dubois was not her real name. She was born Katarina Petrova. Her family were not obscure immigrants from Eastern Europe, as she'd claimed. Her father was Anatoly Petrov, a brilliant software engineer. And 10 years ago, Anatoly Petrov had been one of the 4 original co-founders of Aether Innovations, back when it was just a handful of geniuses in a garage. Sterling felt a cold dread creep up his spine as he read on. The official story was that Anatoly and the other 2 co-founders had cashed out early, selling their shares to Sterling for a modest sum before the company went public. The reality as detailed in Kalen's report was far uglier. Sterling had used deceptive legal tactics and exploited their lack of business acumen to force them out, effectively stealing their intellectual property and their stake in the company that would later be worth billions. Anatoly Petrov had fought him in court for years, lost and died of a heart attack, 2 years later a broken and impoverished man. Katarina, his daughter, was 19 when he died. She had watched her father, a man she idolized, be destroyed by Sterling Blackwood's ruthless ambition, and she had vowed revenge. The report laid it all bare. The aspiring actress persona was a cover. She had spent 5 years meticulously planning her infiltration of Sterling's life. She changed her name, underwent subtle cosmetic procedures, and studied his habits, his tastes, his psychological profile. She learned he had a weakness for younger, adoring women who fed his ego. She manufactured a chance meeting at an art gallery, and from there she played her part to perfection. She was never in love with him. She was a weapon of vengeance. The report even included encrypted emails between her and the children of the other 2 co-founders Sterling had cheated. They called their plan Project Icarus. Their goal was not to get money from Sterling. Their goal was to make him fly as close to the sun as possible and then watch him burn. They had researched his life, his history, and his marriage. They knew about the prenup. They had likely been the ones who anonymously tipped off Amelia's lawyers to start looking closely at Clause 12b. Scarlett's entire mission was to manipulate Sterling into committing a public act of self-sabotage so spectacular that it would trigger the clause. The Apex Gala wasn't his idea. It was hers, whispered into his ear at his most arrogant and vulnerable moment. She didn't want his money. She wanted to see him lose the one thing he loved more than any person, his company. And she wanted him to lose it to the woman he had so carelessly betrayed. It was a form of poetic justice so perfect, it was almost beautiful. Sterling dropped the report on his desk. The room felt like it was tilting. He wasn't the victim of a vindictive wife. He was the architect of his own demise, haunted by the ghosts of his past sins. He had built his empire on a foundation of betrayal, and now the children of the men he had wronged had returned to collect the debt. Scarlett Dubois hadn't been his future wife. She had been his executioner sent from a past he thought he had buried long ago. He had been so busy watching Amelia the enemy in front of him that he never saw the dagger coming from the person sleeping in his bed. The unraveling was complete. He was utterly and completely beaten. The final confrontation did not take place in a sterile courtroom or a high-stakes boardroom. It took place in the neutral territory of Genevieve Croft's 40th floor office, a glass-walled coup overlooking the city Sterling Blackwood, once considered his. The air was thick with tension, a fragile peace before the final surrender. Present were Sterling and his lead counsel, a grim-faced man who knew the fight was over. Across the vast mahogany table sat Amelia, the picture of serene strength with Genevieve by her side. But there were two other people at the table, a surprise Sterling was not prepared for. A man and a woman in their late 20s, their faces etched with a gravity that belied their years. Sterling recognized them instantly from the private investigator's report. Daniel Chen and Maria Rossi, the children of the other two co-founders he had forced out of Aether a decade ago. Scarlett, or rather Katarina, was not present. Her part in the drama was over. There were no pleasantries. Genevieve Croft began, her voice crisp and formal. "We are here to discuss the terms of the transfer. The courts have validated the claim. As of 9 a.m. this morning, a controlling interest in Mr. Blackwood's voting shares in Aether Innovations belongs to Ms. Vance." Sterling's lawyer started to speak a weak protest about appeals, but Genevieve cut him off with a sharp look. "We can spend the next 5 years and $50 million in litigation." "Mr. Blackwood," she said, addressing Sterling directly, "but you will lose, and by the time you lose the company you're fighting for will be a worthless shell. We are offering you a different path." Sterling looked across the table at his wife. He searched her face for any sign of the woman he once loved, but found only a stranger, a cool, calculating strategist who had outplayed him at every turn. "What do you want, Amelia?" he asked, his voice a hollow rasp. "What's the end game to destroy it all, to burn my life's work to the ground?" Amelia met his gaze without blinking. "Your life's work," she replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "You mean Anatoly Petrov's coding architecture, Daniel's father's hardware design, Maria's mother's user interface concept. You didn't build Aether Sterling. You stole it, and you built it on the wreckage of good people's lives." It was then that Daniel Chen spoke, his voice steady and filled with a decade of righteous anger. "Our fathers were partners. They trusted you. You bankrupted them and you broke them. My father died thinking he was a failure. My mother had to go back to teaching." Maria Rossi added, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "She never designed another piece of software again. You took more than their money. You took their spirit." The truth of it all crashed down on Sterling. He had been so consumed with his own narrative of the self-made man that he had forgotten the collateral damage the people he had stepped on to reach the summit. "This was never about revenge for me," Amelia continued, placing a hand on her stomach. "This is about the future. It's about the child I am bringing into this world and the kind of world I want him to live in. It's about ensuring that the legacy he inherits isn't built on a foundation of lies and theft." She then laid out her terms. They were not destructive, they were transformative. "You will resign as CEO of Aether Innovations effective immediately," Genevieve stated, reading from a document. You will also resign your seat on the board. You will retain a minority, non-voting share package, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life, but you will never again have any operational or strategic input into this company. Sterling felt the words like physical blows. His company, his creation. In your place, Genevieve continued, the board, now under Ms. Vance's controlling interest, will appoint a new independent CEO. Furthermore, 30% of the company's shares drawn from the block, now controlled by Ms. Vance, will be placed into a trust. The beneficiaries of that trust will be the families of Anatoly Petrov, Lawrence Chen, and Sophia Rossi, as restitution for their stolen contributions. Daniel and Maria looked at Amelia, their expressions a mixture of shock and profound gratitude. This went beyond what they had ever imagined. "You're giving it away?" Sterling asked, incredulous. "I'm not giving it away," Amelia corrected him. "I am returning it to its rightful owners, and I am cleansing it." Her voice was absolute, leaving no room for argument. Aether will be restructured. It will become a company known for its ethics, not just its innovations. It will honor the people who actually built it. That will be my legacy. That will be my child's legacy. It was a total comprehensive defeat. Sterling was not just being ousted, he was being erased. His history was being rewritten to reflect the truth, and his name was being scrubbed from the empire he had so proudly claimed as his own. He was left with nothing but his money and his public shame. He looked around the room at the faces of the people whose lives he had impacted so profoundly, the wife he betrayed, the children of the partners he cheated. He saw no gloating, no triumphant celebration. He saw only a quiet, somber resolution. Justice. He finally slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. He gave a single, slow nod to his lawyer. "Accept the terms." Amelia stood up, her part in the meeting concluded. She did not give Sterling a final parting glance. He was already a part of her past. She walked towards the door, pausing beside Daniel and Maria. "Let's build something better," she said, softly to them. As she left the room, Sterling Blackwood stared out the window at the city skyline. It was the same view he had looked at every day for years, a vista of power and possibility. But for the first time, he didn't see a kingdom at his feet. He saw a world that was moving on without him, a future he had no part in, a legacy of his own making that had been justly and brilliantly undone. The king was dead. Long live the queen. And so the story of Sterling Blackwood comes to a close. It serves as a stunning, real-world reminder that hubris has a price and that karma sometimes keeps meticulous receipts. Sterling's public declaration of love for his mistress wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a catastrophic miscalculation that cost him everything he held dear. He lost not just his wife, but his entire empire. Amelia Vance, once the silent partner, emerged not as a victim, but as a master strategist. She didn't just get even. She got justice, rewriting the history of the company and securing a new future for herself, her child, and the families her husband had wronged. It's a gripping saga of power, deceit, and the epic downfall of a modern-day titan brought about by the two women he fatally underestimated. If this incredible story of justice and consequence captivated you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Sharing this video with someone who loves a story of epic revenge, and subscribing to our channel for more true stories that are almost too unbelievable to be real. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.